Right, well, the New York Times dropped a 20,000-word piece on Tucker Carlson last week that I really wanted to talk about here because I think it says a lot about the media and particularly a lot about the left and not things that are particularly flattering in that respect. So, Ryan, I'm certainly curious to get your response. But as you see in that headline from The Hill there, Tucker Carlson did brush off that huge hit piece that dubbed him, quote, an American nationalist. He posted a picture of himself actually smiling with a copy of the article. And that really leads us to a really interesting point in and of itself. 10 years ago, 5 years ago, any cable host would have been so fearful of the effects of a hit piece like that in the so-called paper of record in the New York Times. There's no way you would have seen the gleeful sort of boasting on social media holding a paper like that. It does seem that the legacy media is really finally losing so much of its credibility and along with that, so much of its power to the point where the highest watched person in late night is, I think, gets smeared, and Ryan, you may disagree, I'm curious on whether this was a smear. He gets smeared in the paper, holds it up, and it's not even an issue for him. He just sort of brushes past it. So what was your reaction to the reaction to this hit piece, Ryan?
Yeah. Well, it's very similar to the reaction to the New York Times reporters exposing audio of Kevin McCarthy, basically saying the thing that he said that he had never said. And if you remember, you and I, as that story was breaking, we're saying, you know what? And we kind of went against the grain of what the press was saying at the time, which is that, you know what? Fine. And the reason that he's fine here, that he's here, like his enemies are MSNBC, the New York Times, because they went on Rachel Maddow, and also Liz Cheney. And so in our new tribal politics, what you stand for doesn't even matter that much. It's who you stand against. And so as long as you have the right enemies, then you're fine. And so Tucker Carlson having the New York Times as an enemy then tells his viewers, all right, then he must be doing the right thing.
Yeah, so Nick Confessori, who was one of the people on the byline, I think did something very ill-advised. He tweeted a long thread about the story where he presented the idea that Tucker Carlson is an outright racist, which is just an absolutely disgusting thing to say, but he touted that idea. He said this is not opinion, it's fact. And this is what Confessori said in his thread. And to me, that's the heart of the problem, right? Like, I think it's an opinion that Tucker Carlson has been flirting with ideas people call racism. Some people might say it is outright racism. I disagree with that vehemently, but it is an opinion. I think, though, for legacy reporters to present this as a fact and not an opinion, and in fact to actually emphasize and insist that it is fact, not opinion, is a huge source of their drained credibility.
And I think it's fair to say that's an opinion rather than a fact, but it's an opinion based on what our kind of accepted analysis of what racism is over the last 30 or 40 years is. And what's going on here is that Tucker's trying to overturn that and to say, no, I'm going to do all of these things that we had essentially agreed are racist, but I'm going to say that they're not racist, and I'm going to explain why they're not racist. And I'm going to actually say that you are the real racist. Like that's the other move that gets made a lot here, that actually it's the other side that is the racist, with the Spider-Man meme with everybody pointing at each other. And so it has then, by definition, kind of become contested terrain. I can agree with the opinion, but I think you're right that it's now contested territory. And Democrats would be in a much better position to say that, no, our analysis of this, of what constitutes racism is accurate, if they were continuing to hold or grow the number of people of color who are in their coalition rather than shedding them at this point. So if they want to be able to make that argument, they've got to, I think they've got to do better in building their coalition into one that agrees with them.
Right, and I think it's what's contributing to them being less and less powerful by the day. And what's interesting to me is they seem completely blind to that. And that's why the Confessori tweets were so interesting to me, is because, listen, this doesn't fly with readers. And the New York Times now has a subscriber base that is basically it's a niche, right? And that's what happens when our media splinters and fragments into all of these different niches. They're more responsive to the sort of coastal people, educated folks who subscribe to the New York Times, and they don't have to be responsive to, the country in the era of mass, like they would have in the era of mass media, like a more broader audience. So it kind of makes sense from a business perspective why they've leaned so hard into this. But I still think it's a huge source of the public's institutional distrust. They ran a story yesterday about Elon Musk, or on Thursday about Elon Musk, that again was just this sort of like weird guilt by association. He grew up in apartheid South Africa. They buried in the story these ideas that these points from people who grew up with him saying, of course, no, he wasn't racist. He didn't have any of the sort of racist inclinations. And yet still the New York Times tied him, I think, with a lot of innuendo to these problems in South Africa at the time. It was just like, it's so gross. And I don't know, Ryan, how much longer you think they'll continue to sort of take these stabs. Do you think because they have the subscriber base that's sort of winnowed to a vehement sort of left of center educated group of people, do you think it just keeps going, or do you think at some point it stops and they say, okay, enough, there's a way to do this that is going to be more consensus?
Well, they're stuck in a little bit of a contradiction because they do have a progressive subscriber base, and if they're going to come at things from a progressive angle without taking on corporate power or kind of global corporate power, then you're going to be stuck just doing pieces about Elon Musk's upbringing in South Africa, instead of saying, okay, let's take a look at where Elon Musk's money is coming from on this question. So let's stipulate that there is a censorship problem with Twitter.com. Fine, that's accurate. Then the question is Elon Musk the one that's going to solve that? I think Elon Musk, if he were truly independent, maybe actually could be. I don't have the same kind of reflexive hostility that so many people on the left have to him. Maybe he would be, but he's not an independent actor. A lot of his Tesla is half dependent on resources coming out of China. The recent disclosures about where he's getting investment money from are Qatar and Saudi Arabia, I believe. So these would Qatar, Saudi Arabia, and China are not exactly known as foes of censorship or advocates of great free speech. And so China was very upset at the way that Twitter handled Hong Kong, because Twitter refused to take down posts from activists in Hong Kong. But Twitter isn't dependent on China, and so was able to say, this is our policy. If you're a Twitter user in Hong Kong, you can post what you want as long as it's within these particular guidelines. What happens when something like this happens again, and China puts pressure on Musk and says we don't want Taiwanese accounts to be able to post? I think Musk himself, just as a person, would believe very strongly that China has no right to make that demand. Musk, the CEO of Tesla, that needs all of the materials from China to keep his business going, is going to have a much harder time saying that. That could be an interesting place for the Times to go, but that gets them crosswise with some of the other politics of their coalition.
Yeah, no, I don't disagree with that. And there's when Nick Confessore tweeted the piece out, he said Carlson was soon back on the air to accuse liberals and big tech of trying to silence everyone else. And it's such a just amazing lack of self-awareness that if the story was an attempt at doing anything, it was discrediting Tucker Carlson to turn down the volume of his voice, clearly. And so because there's one network that has somebody like Tucker Carlson on it, that should be enough for the right. And that's, the kind of the perspective that I think is being taken here. Ryan, any final thoughts on the 20,000 word?
It is true that Tucker is a cultural phenomenon, and that I think he is playing to people's very worst instincts and throwing gasoline on a fire that's already raging. And the New York Times pointing that out, I don't know what that's going to ultimately do in the end. It just seems like we're just doomed to watch all of this just crash.
Yeah, and my recommendation for Tucker's detractors would be to like sit through a few full episodes. I think it's a different show than a lot of people would expect it to be. But with that, you can of course read that on the New York Times website if you must. Actually, it's kind of interesting piece of media. So we will be back with more Rising right after this.